They tore down my barn. The words echoed in my head as I stood on the edge of the property, dust and splintered wood still rising from the ruins. It wasn't an accident, nor was it a miscommunication. The HOA had come with their trucks, their papers, their smug authority, and with cold efficiency, demolished the place I had built with my own hands. Years of sweat, of early mornings and late nights, gone in the blink of a bureaucrat's pen. But it wasn't just about a barn. It was about pride, about ownership, about the unspoken understanding that what is yours cannot simply be erased because someone else claims power. For months, they had sent notices, fines, and violations, each one more absurd than the last. The barn had been inspected, condemned, and finally torn down, all under the guise of rules no one could explain. I looked toward their resort lake, shimmering under the morning sun, the water calm, almost mocking. The HOA executives lounged in their waterfront cabins, oblivious to the injustice they had committed, confident in their sense of untouchable authority. They didn't know what it meant to fight for something, to build from nothing, to lose it all and still stand unbroken. I didn't say a word. I didn't shout. I just walked to the valve next to the lake. The metal was cold under my hands, humming faintly with the flow of water behind it, an unnoticed lever of power waiting to be acknowledged. Years of planning, observation, and silent frustration had led to this moment. The sun reflected off the water as I twisted the handle, feeling the tension and the inevitability in the air. Somewhere deep inside, the barn's memory burned, a quiet fire of resilience and defiance. The lake, serene and peaceful to the untrained eye, was about to become a statement no one could ignore. Hit subscribe, watch till the end. The morning was still, the kind of quiet that feels almost unnatural, the air heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. I walked the perimeter of my property, the remnants of my barn scattered across the grass like broken memories. Every beam, every plank, every rusted nail told a story of sweat and dedication. A story now silenced by the HOA's cold decree. Their trucks had left hours ago, but the weight of their presence lingered, a shadow over the land I had fought to claim as mine. I had built this barn from scratch, laying each foundation stone with care, cutting each timber with hands blistered and calloused. It had been more than a structure. It was a symbol of persistence, a fortress of solitude in a world that often demanded compromise. And yet, here I was, staring at ruins, knowing that the people responsible for this destruction were lounging comfortably in their waterfront cabins, drinking coffee and laughing as if they had won some invisible battle. For months, their harassment had escalated. First, it was letters filled with bureaucratic jargon, citing obscure violations that no one could define. Then came fines, threats, and inspections designed to intimidate rather than inform. Each encounter left a bitter taste of injustice, a reminder that authority could be wielded without fairness, and that rules were only as moral as the hands that enforced them. I had watched them, studied them, learned their patterns, their routines. The HOA believed in control through visibility, in fear through presence. They did not expect resistance, especially not from someone who had endured far greater challenges, someone who had learned to see opportunity in every constraint. Beyond the ruins of the barn, the lake stretched like a sheet of glass, reflecting the sky in perfect, mocking serenity. The resort buildings rose elegantly along its edge, a showcase of wealth and power, a monument to their sense of untouchability. No one noticed the valve at the lake's edge, a simple mechanism buried in plain sight, overlooked by those who assumed that dominion over the water meant dominion over reality itself. I moved closer, boots crunching on gravel, the hum of unseen currents under the metal handle resonating faintly with my pulse. Each step carried the weight of decision, of preparation, of restrained fury. The barn had been taken from me, but the water had yet to speak. I paused, hands resting lightly on the cold metal of the valve. The sun glinted off the surface of the lake, catching on the ripples as if the water itself anticipated what was coming. There was a silence heavier than grief, a quiet that seemed to stretch and coil, waiting. I could almost hear the smug laughter from the resort cabins, the voices of those who thought themselves untouchable. And in that moment, I realized the truth. Power is not always obvious, and authority is fragile when confronted with patience, knowledge, and resolve. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to fight them in their cabins. All I needed was leverage, and the lake, like a coiled serpent, was mine to command. The barn may have been demolished, but the stage was set. Every detail, every observation, every quiet act of preparation over the past months had led to this. And as I gripped the valve, the tension of anticipation coursed through my veins. The calm surface of the lake hid a force waiting to be unleashed, a reminder that consequences do not respect comfort or complacency. They respect action. The lake reflected the sun's harsh glare, but the shimmer didn't hide the brewing tension. Across the water, the HOA resort stood pristine, its manicured lawns and luxury cabins a stark contrast to the devastation behind me. The remnants of my barn were still scattered across the field, but my focus had shifted entirely. What they had destroyed, they had not controlled. The water beneath the dam valve waited patiently, and I knew that it would speak with a clarity that bureaucrats could not ignore. For weeks, I had studied the patterns of the HOA's patrols, noting when they visited, when they conducted inspections, and when they celebrated their petty victories in the cabins overlooking the lake. They believed that visibility meant control. They didn't notice the small, overlooked mechanisms of power, the valves, the irrigation systems, the channels that controlled water flow. While they flaunted authority in plain sight, they had ignored the real leverage hidden in the infrastructure they assumed belonged entirely to them. Each day, I had walked past the valve, checking it silently, measuring its position, imagining the consequences of turning it. It was a quiet rebellion, invisible to those who believed dominance could be maintained through intimidation alone. The barn had been a test, a measure of their arrogance. They had failed spectacularly, revealing the hubris that would soon be their undoing. The officers patrolling the area grew bolder, assuming that destruction and threats were sufficient to establish dominance. I watched from a distance, concealed in the shadows of my own property, noting the direction of the wind, the angle of the sun, the timing of their shifts. Each detail mattered. A single misstep could expose me too soon. Precision was essential as it had always been. I approached the valve once more, hands gripping the cold metal. The hum of water beneath it was a subtle promise, a quiet vibration that mirrored the tension building in my chest. It was more than engineering. It was strategy. The lake itself was a weapon, silent, patient, waiting to obey only when I decided. Inside the resort, the HOA executives were blissfully unaware of the calculations unfolding. They believed in the supremacy of paper, in the authority of bylaws, in the superiority of intimidation. They didn't account for foresight, for patience, for the quiet defiance of someone who had learned to convert perceived weakness into undeniable leverage. As the sun climbed higher, shadows shifted across the land, marking time with the inevitability of consequence. I imagined the moment the water would respond, the way it would ripple across the lake and touch every dock, every cabin, every polished facade of arrogance. It would not destroy indiscriminately. It would remind them, in the most undeniable way, that authority is meaningless without respect for those it affects. The officers outside the resort started their rounds, unaware of the impending shift in power. Their laughter, their casual conversations, their sense of impunity, all of it hung in the air like smoke, ready to be swept away by the current I was about to release. My pulse remained steady, my breath even. I had learned long ago that anticipation, carefully controlled, was more powerful than force. Every visit they had made to my property had taught me more than frustration. It had taught me patience, observation, and the value of subtle leverage. Each notice they sent, each attempt to intimidate had been cataloged, analyzed, and stored. I knew their routines better than they knew their own rules. I knew the exact time when the lake would have the most immediate effect, when the valves could be adjusted to maximize their attention without causing unnecessary collateral damage. And so I waited. Time stretched taut, the hum of the lake beneath the valve growing louder in my ears. The resort was still, serene, unknowing. The officers were still, complacent, unaware that the moment they believed to be secure was about to transform into one of complete disorientation. Finally, I turned the valve slightly, testing the response. The water shifted imperceptibly at first, a whisper beneath the surface, unnoticed. But it was enough, a signal that the plan was in motion. The lake, a silent participant, began to move according to the leverage I had patiently cultivated. Minutes passed. The hum beneath the valve intensified, echoing through the stillness, a warning to those who had ignored consequences for too long. And as I prepared for the final adjustment, the stakes crystallized. This was no longer about a barn, no longer about petty HOA tyranny. This was about respect, about power, about the lesson that those who misuse authority often forget. Patience and knowledge outweigh force. The stage was set. The water was ready. The executives remained oblivious, their arrogance complete, and I stood at the edge, calm, steady, and prepared. Every calculation, every observation, every silent hour of planning had led to this moment. The rising tension was palpable. A taut thread stretched across land, water, and ego, waiting for the single action that would make the consequence unavoidable. I gripped the valve tightly, the hum of water beneath it vibrating through my hands. One slow twist, and the lake would respond, not with chaos, but with undeniable consequence. The HOA executives, lounging in their cabins, remained blissfully unaware of the leverage they had ignored for months. The water shifted first subtly, then with a quiet force, rippling outward toward docks, walkways, and shorelines. The mirrored calm of the lake fractured, reflecting panic and confusion as the executives realized something beyond their control was happening. Their carefully curated authority crumbled in the face of a patient, calculated response they had never anticipated. From my vantage point, the sun glinted off the lake's surface, catching on waves that now obeyed my command. Each ripple was a message. Respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. Every inch of water carried the memory of my demolished barn, the months of harassment, and the silent defiance I had cultivated. The officers ran, shouting and gesturing, but it was too late. The lake, calm for so long, had awakened, not in anger, but in precision. And in that moment, I felt the quiet satisfaction of balance restored. Authority misused had met the consequences it deserved. The lake settled slowly, the ripples fading into a deceptive calm. From the cabins, the HOA executives watched in stunned silence, their sense of control shattered. The perfectly manicured lawns, the polished docks, the pristine lakefront. They realized that all their symbols of authority meant nothing when confronted with foresight and resolve. The barn might have been demolished, but the lesson it inspired had reshaped the power dynamic entirely. I stood at the edge of the water, hands still on the valve, watching the subtle movements of the lake as it returned to serenity. It was a quiet victory, one that required no confrontation, no shouting, no dramatics. Power had been demonstrated through preparation, patience, and the calm application of leverage they could never have anticipated. Every wave, every shift of water, had spoken louder than any argument or legal threat. The officers and executives slowly began to retreat, their faces pale, their arrogance stripped away. They had believed that fear and bureaucracy could bend reality, but they had underestimated the depth of understanding, experience, and strategic patience that I had cultivated. Authority had been misused, but it had been corrected, not with violence, but with consequence, precision, and timing. Looking back at the remains of my barn, I felt a quiet resolve. Buildings can be destroyed, but resolve, knowledge, and strategic action are unbreakable. The lake had delivered justice without a single life endangered, proving that true power often resides in subtlety rather than force. And in that moment, one undeniable truth became clear. The people who wield authority without comprehension will always encounter forces they cannot predict. The lesson, though simple, was absolute. Respect, earned through patience, strategy, and resilience, outweighs any badge, any decree, or any paper notice. As I turned from the lake, leaving the hum of water and the echo of consequence behind, I knew the HOA would never forget. Neither would the officers. and neither would I. The barn may be gone, but the principle it represented, and the lesson delivered through quiet mastery, would resonate far longer than wood, nails, or bureaucracy ever could.